Terry Byrne, who is the retiring broadcast manager here at Planet FM. She's our guest today because she remembers an approach from a Framework staff member, Suella Gray, to explore mental health issues through a regular program, a proposal which was somewhat revolutionary due to prevailing attitudes about mental health in the 1990s. Well, Terry, when you sort of got that approach, what was your response?
Well, I remember Suella, but not in terms of the moment of approach. I know that we consulted quite a lot with Framework Trust, with John Matthews, who was the general manager or whatever his title was at the time, and Suella, it was sort of a groundswell idea, I think, from her point of view, because the principle of community access broadcasting is that the voices of real people with things that they need to talk about and to be heard, are brought to the airways through this medium. And I think Suella's idea was that we would actually possibly for the first time hear the voices of those who were struggling with mental health issues, or who had been through it and understood and could bring those stories to air. And that possibly came as a little bit of a challenge internally to Framework Trust. So we did spend a lot of time talking and consulting with the organisation, and then they agreed for it to go ahead, and Suella built a team with Erwin. Now, you need to provide me with surnames.
Yeah, Erwin Van Aspect, who was with Toyora Live Arts for a long time.
Well, yes, but Erwin was with Framework Trust full-time at that stage, and Reed, who was one of the group's clients, and they... One of the things that became apparent to me in talking with them was that it needed to be a no surprises environment. So particularly for some of the clients that were coming in, some of those who were still struggling with their mental health issues, to go into a studio with lights switching on, noises coming through the speakers, having to wear headphones, these were all a little bit, anxiety provoking. So I said to Suella, the thing I think we should do is that you should bring your team, and we will book, as if you're going to be on air, we will book an hour's time in the studio for you just to sit there, talk amongst yourselves, switch things off and on, not make a radio show.
Right.
Just sit there and get used to the environment, so that when the day came, they would, they'd see the on-air light go on, or they would hear something come through their headphones or whatever, and it wouldn't be, something that made them too nervous. So they did that, and we thought, that's good. They've done it once. They continued to do it for about 5 or 6 weeks, an hour a week.
That's right.
And we were going, oh, that's a bit of a surprise.
The same people.
I think there was always actually a reasonably sizable team of about 5 people involved, and so they were sitting around and just discovering themselves in that space. So of course we said, well, if that's how it needs to be, then off you go and do that. And then they finally came forward and said, okay, I think we're ready to give this thing a go.
Okay, and was it an hour-long show then?
Yes, I believe so. I think it's always been an hour.
Yeah, well, I suppose my approach with people with lived experience, and I'm one of those, is to try and meet them over a coffee, create an atmosphere which is relaxed, and give them an idea of, for me to get their story and to understand the extent of their lived experience and what they're doing, and then to put some questions to them beforehand to make them comfortable. And that seems too to be a way of bringing them into the studio, which can be very anxiety provoking. And I think it's important to try and make this a win-win situation in the studio rather than a win-lose, where somebody goes away thinking they've messed up, they've got very anxious about it. So that is one of the sort of realities, I guess, of mental health radio.
Yeah, and, I mean, really what's happening in radio, people say to me, across the board we have over 100 programs and deal with a lot of people from all sorts of corners of our world, and some of them go, oh, no, I could never make a radio show. And I say, look, can you talk to your neighbour over the fence? Can you, have a chat with your friends over coffee? And they go, yeah. I said, if you can have a conversation, then you can make a radio show, because ultimately that's what it is. It's a public conversation.
Right. And really, it's you can just treat it as a conversation like we're doing today. There's really only two people in the studio. You don't have to think about the listeners, because one of the issues, I suppose, with Planet FM is you never know how many listeners are out there.
Well, in fact, we would always think about the listeners because the listener is the other party present in the conversation. And it's not about talking amongst ourselves about ourselves. It's about engaging them in the ideas of the conversation and always referencing them, at least in your head, and quite often with little additional pieces of information so that it isn't a closed scenario. I think one of the things that's been a lessening of the effectiveness of radio to some degree is some of the sort of teams that you get on commercial breakfast shows and stuff where they're all giggling and playing amongst themselves. And I think, yes, meantime, the audience is sitting out there going, well, why am I not really at this table?
Right.
And so the audience is always the unseen presence at the table, and they, of course, are who we're doing this all for anyway. We sit here on a campus that was once Carrington Mental Institution, Oakley Hospital, etc., and it came from, in many ways, a very Victorian position on mental health for a very long time. And I think certainly when the program first went to air, the status of mental health was that it was done to the patient, and that it was important for people to say, but this is not my reality. My reality is like this. I do have power and insight to bring, and I have experience to be shared, and the authorities, I think, were kind of more the focus in some ways initially. The authorities need to understand what it is to be in this position and model the services accordingly. And nobody knows more about what services are needed than those who are having them sort of plonked upon them, and this was an opportunity for them to say, no, it would have been much more helpful if, and they can say that, and to have a public voice from those who had been silenced utterly by the system for so long was really important.
It was the first broadcast was in April 1993, and I think Framework was formed as a community mental health organisation, an NGO working in the community in 1984. So some of the large psychiatric bins were still in the process of closing when this radio show opened, and I guess there was a lot of people who had been damaged by those big hospitals, and it is quite a coincidence really that Planet FM is established here so close to what was Carrington and Oakley hospitals.
Well, this was actually the doctor's house, and those buildings that are outside our studio window, so you have to imagine this, listeners, are just a couple of tiers of buildings that were for the nurses, and this was the duty doctor in here, and it subsequently became a temporary stay building, and it was quite interesting when we were rehabbing the building into a radio station, sort of to discover small pieces of evidence of people's time here. Yeah. And it was an interesting contrast because people want respite stay sometimes, and it had clearly become quite difficult to get that. Basically, while they talked about the changing of the mental health environment, we're going to close the big institutions down. Oh, yes, and we will have facilities available in the community. There were very limited facilities available in the community. So people sometimes said, I just need, I need a week out of this madness. Come in here, give me some support and some shelter. So we have a multi-paned glass door at the front, and all but about 3 of those had been broken at some stage. And it became apparent that it was was both. I would like to leave, or I'd like to come in.
Right.
And
it was hard to do one or the other.
Yeah, you couldn't necessarily have your way on either count, so you had to do a little bit of forcing of the situation.
Yeah, well, I've actually interviewed people. Our ex-CEO at Framework had actually worked in this building, so, that was quite a coincidence. So obviously, your Planet FM's response to this request was very empathetic. It sounds as though you were able to provide a very empathetic environment for people to become familiar with being on air.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is what we're charged with, really. Our job is to offer people an opportunity to have their own voice. And to do that, everybody has to go through some kind of learning process. And it has to be one that makes them feel like they have that capacity and that it isn't a fearful process. And we train everybody who comes here, and they have to not only learn some technical things sometimes. Some of their shows are pre-recorded, a lot of them are live, but they have to learn the sort of disciplines of the medium and just how much they can do. But we have no determination over the content of the programs.
Right.
We're here for you and all of the program makers to have their own voice, and we facilitate that through training.
And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Terry, and the team for the support to Take It From Us for 25 years, because sincerely there has been tremendous support, and I went through a time where I lost my technician and we were able to pre-record shows and Planet FM accommodated.
As the destigmatisation campaign got underway, I think it became, I think if you look back in history, artists of all stripes have quite often been dealing with mental health issues at the same time, perhaps not so recognised. But in that world of creativity, there's a lot of fringe dwelling, shall we say. So the music is yet another wonderful way for people to tell their story, really.
Yeah, well, I think Take It From Us has certainly supported and backed many of the musicians with lived experience who have got to quite an advanced point of producing their own CD boost in my own personal confidence. And I think that's something that's so wonderful about Planet FM and what it offers in terms of a community voice.
Well, it's inclusive, people, all of the people, regardless of what you're dealing with at the time, have a story to tell and have a place in it. And you can turn on any amount of media and not see something that represents your own life, your own culture, your own language, or your own experience. And here's an opportunity for people to share that, and it's meaningful. It's meaningful because everywhere out there in the audience there are people who go, oh my God, I thought I was the only one, or I didn't realise that that was happening to other folks. And it's just a constant points of identification with people in their lives. So the Hearing Voices episode, we did have one interesting event in the old AUT premises. One of the members of the team at that time had come into the recording studio. They had done a live program. I think they were going to pre-record some little cuts or an interview or something. And in the studio, you have quite often your operator is in one room, and then you're in the studio with headphones and things, and the headphones may be lying on the table before you get started. On this occasion, this gentleman sat down, and the technician was starting to play some material back, but they hadn't got to the point of recording, and some headphones were sitting on the table, and suddenly he started to get incredibly anxious and started looking all around the room and getting very antsy. And the technician said, hey, can you put your headphones on now, please? And he's going, what? And he says, and the voices stopped. And he put the headphones on, and he said, what's going on? And he said, oh, no, I was just playing some stuff back. And he went, oh, thank goodness, he said, I thought my voices had come back.
Oh, really? Because one of the trainings, I think, with hearing voices is they have to put headphones on to counter
to muffle it. In this case, the sound was coming from nowhere that he could identify in the room, so he thought that it was in his head. So, that's a very real experience of something, and of dealing day by day with the illnesses that people have to cope with.
And I think one of the great things in having a mental health radio show is that people can learn that they're not alone with that particular illness, that there are a whole lot of other people out there that have illnesses or mental health experience, which we talk about on radio. So the quality of some of those first mental health broadcasts, they were a bit, pioneering, I suppose?
No, because I think the team was very well managed, with Sue Ella and Irwin in particular, and presumably, I don't know how much pre-production they did back at Framework and so on, but they always knew what they were about and who they wanted to talk to, and they got a really good variety of coverage from all sorts of people, and the result of that, in fact, was over probably a 5-year period. The program won 2 national awards through the Radio Awards, which is an industry-wide award system that operates, and it was really, I know for those who went to the first award ceremony, which was at Sky City, and it was, all lights and bells and very flash, and you got all dressed up, and there were photographers and stuff like that, that experience for particularly those who on the team who were still dealing with mental health and stuff, to be able to walk up onto a stage in front of a national group of broadcasters and say, we made something that was such an effective communication that's award-winning, and we did it from our position and our experience of mental health. And it was a huge boost to their understanding of the fact that really they do have a part, and that they can be equal to or better than others in that process. So.
Yeah, well, a great example of people with lived experience of mental health being included. It was a huge thrill to Declan Curran, who's the current technician on Mental Health Radio, Take It From Us, and myself to be runners-up in that national award in the community section in, I think it was 2013, and I know that Declan posted it on our Facebook page, and he showed off the award. Discrimination and stigma, they would have been some of the things that the early shows of Take It From Us probably addressed.
I think it was huge. I think that campaign made a 180-degree turnaround on public awareness of these things, and really necessary to happen, and I think probably incredibly valuable for the mental health community overall. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we were able to do with some initiatives from a group of people with lived experience on Waiheke Island was to sort of have a sister show on Waiheke Island on Waiheke Radio, and I used to go over there every Friday and just help them interview people. So it was probably, and it was such a small little studio, and you'd squeeze in and there'd be 3 microphones and a little room on the other side, a bit of glass, and it was all pretty basic. So I guess that was very much what it was like when you started in the basement.
The basement, my goodness me, that was a pretty difficult space. There was no sort of air conditioning or anything else. There was, it was tiny. It was pretty much packed with equipment, and I always used to say, look, we had a kettle that leaked all over the place. So even sort of having a cup of tea or something like that, we had, one desk in a corner with a single computer for administration on it, and it was basic. Right. It was basic.
You've introduced the Mikey Awards, which are the annual awards, and much awaited, I think, by all broadcasters. And you've developed it to becoming a wonderful, culturally rich and diverse event, and the last Mikey Awards was some wonderful and colourful presentations by, I think, who was it, the Koreans?
Last one we had a ukulele band with Marion Burns in the lead, but that was the 30th anniversary one. All previous years, the Mikeys have been hosted by one of our participating communities in terms of we provide obviously the food and drink and everything else, but or the funding for that, and then the host community prepares the food, so you get to sample food from their part of the world, and they put on the entertainment. So we've had an opportunity as a collective to experience everyone's cultures, food, special festivals, and so on. And it's a way. I mean, we're a big United Nations operation here of people from all angles, and once again, visibility is part of what we do. You know, making the mental health perspective visible through radio, but also the website. So people's faces and cultures are very strongly represented in the website, and likewise they are at our annual event for the Mikey Awards.
Yeah. I mean, without boasting too much, I mean, this is part of the history of Take It From Us. We have won 9 consecutive Mikey Awards. We missed out last year, which was actually our 10th year. Would have been lovely to have celebrated my 10th year of broadcasting with a Mikey, but that wasn't to happen. But what were they awarded for?
Okay, the Mikeys have a lot of different categories, and the Mikey Awards received by Take It From Us have been what we call the People's Choice, in that they get we have a top 10 of hits on the website. So they represent people who are coming to the website to listen to the program, because every program broadcast here is available 5 minutes after the show completes for people to listen to on demand throughout the following 5 weeks or so. And so people can come and listen day and night when they're available, or in some cases go to archives and say, gosh, you know, I really got a lot of strength from that information, or I'd like to share that with friends, and it's available online for them. So coming to the website and hitting on Take It From Us, each time that happened, the count goes up, and you were in the top 10 for that count.